Hey guys, today I'm talking about overwintering tomatoes. It's a process that's really easy if you follow some very specific steps. You can get 2 years out of your tomato bushes and sometimes even 3 out of those vine bushes. Now, of course, when I say bushes, I'm talking about indeterminate because the determinate varieties are going to live for a very specific amount of time and then that's pretty much it. So what I should say is the indeterminate varieties are going to be the ones you want to overwinter. So guys, you're going to want to carefully inspect whatever tomato plant you're planning on bringing inside, whether it's in a container like this or in the ground. You want to make sure that it's disease-free and pest-free. You want a really strong tomato plant that's growing vigorously so it will survive the overwintering process. So once you've selected the plant you want to bring inside and overwinter, you want to prune it down to the main stem and also reduce about 1/3 of the total volume to ensure the plant's vigor and survivability throughout the winter. Now, if you're digging up your tomato from in ground or in the ground up in an above raised bed and you're not bringing it in a predetermined container like this, then you want to make sure you preserve as much of the root ball as possible to make sure that the survivability is at its maximum and also prevent any root damage. Now, if you're like me and your garage is going to be absolutely filled with a lot of plants you're trying to overwinter, such as peppers and other frost sensitive varieties of plants, you want to make sure that you initially quarantine the new plant away from the rest of your plants to make sure that you don't introduce any diseases into your plant collection. Now, unless you're bringing it to an indoor heated and air-conditioned controlled environment and you're just going to put it in a garage, you want to make sure that the garage temperature fluctuates between about 60 and 70 and make sure it doesn't get too cold in that area by having a small space heater, a safe one that has a feature that if it was to fall over or something like that, it would automatically cut off. So just remember, using a small space heater is going to keep your tomatoes and other plants from getting below that critical temperature, because even my garage can get quite cold in a really Arctic blast. Now, even if your basement or garage has windows and you're just planning on setting your tomatoes near those areas, you're still going to want to have a full spectrum grow light, and I'll link some of those down below, and make sure that you have it on a timer for a minimum of 10 hours a day up to 12 hours a day to mimic the sunlight it's going to receive in the warmer months and avoid allowing it to get too little sunlight or too little light that it's going to need throughout the winter. Now, whether you decide to put it into your finished area of your home or an unfinished basement or garage, you want to remember you need really good humidity, about 60 to 70%, and you can use a hydrometer to make sure that you're at or around that level there. But also, if you need to introduce a humidifier to the specific area where you have your tomatoes, just so they won't dry out or have any issues because of the air being way too dry. And that's usually how it is in my house in the winter. The air is really dry without a humidifier. Now, one more quick note about humidity. If the humidity is too high, then your tomatoes may become prone to fungal diseases. So just remember, if it's really up there and too high and there's not any air circulation, you can have issues with fungal diseases. If you're digging your tomato out of the ground, you want to make sure that you leave as much of that soil behind and use a sterile potting mix so you don't bring any possible pathogens, diseases, or insects that would really enjoy being inside of that type of environment and thrive quite really good inside your home in the winter. So just remember, sterile potting mix. Another important thing to remember is if you're putting it into a container, make sure there's adequate drainage on that container. You're probably wondering, if you haven't seen the video, you're probably wondering what this setup is and why there's a solar panel attached to the bucket. And I made a video about this recently and I'll link it up above, but it's something that just kind of came to me one day about self-watering containers. So I'll link that video as well. So you're going to want to do weekly checks for any diseases, signs of diseases, spots, wilting, or anything like that. And I've got another video that talks about hydrogen peroxide and its many uses in the garden. I'll link that as well. And that can also help your tomato plants get through the winter with minimal issues. Now, if you do have a severe fungal issue with your tomato plant, you can use an organic fungicide and just do a foliar spraying throughout the winter. And you can do that about once a week until that problem dissipates. One of the main issues or problems that can happen is you think that your tomato plant needs the same amount of water that it did when it was outside in the warmer months. And that's completely untrue because it's kind of going into a semi-dormant state. And that's why it's really a good idea to have a pH monitor that also has a moisture meter, and you can check the top 2 inches of soil just to make sure that it's not dried out. But as long as that top 2 inches of soil shows that it has moisture and it's not completely dry, don't worry about adding water until you see that occurring. So it's very likely you will bring some pest inside with your plant. It's almost inevitable that there was probably something you missed, and I'll put a link to some all-natural organic pesticide formula that I think will really help you. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to do a quick spray right before you bring it inside, and that can knock down anything. But if there's eggs that were protected from that spray, you may still need to watch and very carefully look under the underside of leaves to make sure you don't have a pest problem burgeoning. So guys, when you first pruned your plant and you brought it inside, you want to make sure that you sterilize those pruners, and I always recommend using Listerine or its generic form, which is even cheaper, from the dollar store. And also, as the winter progresses, you want to remove any diseased or dying branches, and it could be just from the stress of being transferred from outside to inside. So remember, sterilize your pruners with some just generic Listerine product. Now, some of the midwinter maintenance you're going to need to do is removing dead or dying branches or leaves. And so that's just one of those things that's going to happen throughout the winter. You'll need to monitor that carefully and just make sure you keep on top of that. Even though you wouldn't think it would happen, even though it's in a perfect environment, it's going to need a little bit of pruning throughout the winter. So as an indeterminate tomato, you're going to need to provide staking throughout the winter because it will slowly grow during that time. I had to remove the stake to get this into the greenhouse, but just remember that staking will be a need that you have to set up in your garage, basement, or even in your finished area of your home. So as I said earlier, my basement, usually in the wintertime, is quite filled with a variety of plants. And so you don't want to put them too close together and cause them to be crowded. If you're forced to put them a little too close for your comfort, then get a small fan and put it on a timer, and that will allow for more circulation that will prevent any fungal issues that could arise from stagnant air and then not having a good airflow within that basement area or garage area. Now, in regards to fertilization throughout the winter, you want to make sure that you continue to fertilize, but only at half the recommended strength that you were normally doing out in the garden in the warmer months. Also, you want to use something that has higher phosphorus but very low nitrogen levels. You don't want a lot of leaf growth. You want to encourage more root growth. So that P and NPK is phosphorus, and this is a great product that has a very high phosphorus count, Schultz Bloom Booster. Now, if you want to go the completely organic route, you can use bone meal. It has very low nitrogen but high phosphorus as well, and that's what I'd recommend if you want to avoid this type of fertilizer and go the organic route. So even if you are using a grow light and you're seeing really leggy growth and pale leaves, it could mean that your tomato plant is not getting enough light. So you want to adjust your grow lights a little bit closer to your tomato plant to make sure that it's getting adequate full spectrum light. So this has been my greenhouse heater for well over a decade, and it's got an automatic thermostat, and it's got tip over protection should it fall over. So wherever you put your tomato plants, and if you put them too close to a heater like this, it could easily dry out the leaves. So just make sure that you put it far enough away from any heat source like this, because it can really dry out your tomato plant, and also it could possibly increase growth and also watering needs. So just kind of keeping it in that semi-state of dormancy is really what we're aiming for. Now, on the flip side of the coin of heating, you have cold drafts, and in the wintertime, I made the mistake last year of putting a tomato plant too close to a side door. We were constantly going in and out. The tomato plant did not like that location. It let us know by wilting and really underperforming. So just remember, you don't want it close to an area where you're constantly going in and out. You want it away from those areas where it's a little more protected. So last year we had another issue, which was mold on the surface of the soil, and that was a sign of overwatering. So just remember, that can cause a problem very quickly from overwatering, and that goes back to monitoring your pH, not monitoring your soil moisture with your pH monitor very closely. Another potential problem with mold could be caused from poor ventilation. So that goes back to having a small fan on a timer, on and off, probably for about 30 minutes for 12 hours a day. And that way you can be assured of good air circulation. So guys, as the date of your last frost is approaching, and you can get that pretty easy by going to weather.gov and putting in your zip code, and that'll give you your estimated last frost date. You want to start preparing to harden off your tomato plant so you can acclimate it back to the outside. So you're going to take it outside for 1 to 2 hours a day during the warmer time of the day, and allow it to slowly get back used to being outside. So just remember, that's going to take a week to 2 weeks, but you want to make sure that you don't leave it out overnight when there's a chance of frost. Now, once you move your plant back out into the garden and you're past that frost state, you still may want to provide it a little bit of protection by something like a hoop house, some type of container that will go over it if it's close to the ground. If you have a really tall tomato plant, then you're going to have a problem protecting it. But even though you're past your frost date, those colder winds or colder air, even in the springtime, can really dry out your tomato plant. So you just want to make sure that you give it a little bit of protection until the days start gradually getting a little bit warmer. Now, if you're planning on taking your tomato out of whatever container you have it growing in and putting it directly back into the garden, you may want to rotate it to a new area, because though replanting your tomatoes in the same area year after year could introduce it to the diseases that are in the soil. So just remember, you want to do a little bit of crop rotation. If it's going to be in a bucket, then that's not so much of an issue. But if you're planning on back in the ground, just remember to do that. Now, once it does go back into the ground, it's really highly recommended that you do a lot of mulching at the base of the plant, because you want to regulate that soil temperature and moisture. And I always recommend using a product from Lowe's called Soil Conditioner. It's a very finely shredded pine bark. It will keep your weeds down. I used to use a very large pine bark, and it's just not, it wasn't degrading enough. It wasn't turning back into soil fast enough. So I'll absolutely recommend that you use something like this that's very finely shredded. So once your tomato plant has been back in the garden, in the ground, or in the pot, wherever you've placed it, in about 2 to 3 weeks, you can resume its normal fertilization schedule with its full strength fertilizer, whatever brand you choose. So just give it that 2 to 3 week period. Now, I'm a huge believer in micro irrigation and drip irrigation, because it saves you so much on your watering, and it keeps your plants very happy because you're delivering the moisture right to where the plant needs it most. Now, I just recently put up a video about an ancient method of watering, and it's very interesting to me. I'm still studying it and reading about it, but I'll link that video up above too. But that's an alternate way of doing irrigation if you don't have an in-place system and you don't want to do an overspray on your garden like a lot of people do, and that causes a lot more problems than you'd realize. Now, more than likely, after about 2 to 3 years, you will see the tomato plant losing a lot of its vigor, and it will not be producing as well as it once did. It's just, even though it's an indeterminate variety, it's not going to last forever. You can stretch its life out quite a bit, but it's going to start showing signs of its age pretty quickly. Now, there is another alternative to bringing the entire plant in, is you can create one of these cloning devices, and I've got a video I'll link up above exactly how to make it. It's not hard. Very simple, but you can take some of your suckers that are growing out of the elbows of your tomato plant and start them as new plants. And so that way you'll have an identical clone of the plant that you enjoyed so much the summer before, but you're starting over with a much smaller plant. And that might be the way to go, because they will be in their first year of growth, and that will probably render you a lot better results. So guys, overwintering, and the reason that we do it is to preserve a plant or a tomato plant that we really enjoyed the fruit from it. And so a lot of people will just say, I'll just clone it, and that's a perfectly valid option, or they'll help it to survive a second season. So just remember that there's some extra options in there, not just bringing the entire plant in, but creating whole new plants that are identical to the mother plant. So just remember, if you're planning on doing this, don't try it with a determinate variety, because those tomato plants are determined to go to a certain size, produce a certain amount of fruit, and genetically that's it for them. So you want to do the indeterminate variety so you can do this a second season. And I would absolutely encourage you to build one of these cloning devices. It will help you have as many of the tomato plants you love so much by duplicating the plant that did so well for you. So guys, there is a possibility you might see some actual tomato growth throughout the winter, but I think in the colder months, you're going to see production of actual tomatoes come to almost complete stop. So don't be surprised if that happens. It's just a normal part of the tomato plant conserving its energy. So guys, I just want to say thanks so much for watching. If I left anything out, please leave it in the comments below. I hope you'll like and subscribe if you found something helpful, and I hope you have a great day.